Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Puck Watching STL and our first off-season edition to the show. Today, we welcome former player for the men's University of Vermont ice hockey team, former assistant coach for the Babson College hockey team as well, the former president CEO of the Nike Bauer Hockey, as well as the Vancouver Canucks, then the president of Easton Sports, and now the president and the CEO of the St. Louis Blues. That's a lot right there.
Sounds like a guy that can't keep a job. Actually, so we could start. We could start there.
Well, it's a long career, but we are proud to welcome Chris Zimmerman to the show. Chris, we're very excited to have you on.
Well, thanks, guys. No, I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Well, I think we'll talk about your many jobs, I think, later on. But let's talk about your love for hockey and kind of where it began, because obviously you played college at the University of Vermont. So I guess starting from there and then moving forward after that. So what were your kind of career aspirations looking like as you kind of were going through Vermont? Did it kind of be in your future? Did you envision that to have that sort of business ops, all of that in your future?
No, none of that actually. When I went to play college hockey, I mean, my whole sort of aspiration was to try to play Division I hockey, and I got to the University of Vermont, played 4 years, played whatever, dressed for every game that I wasn't on the injured list, but I also knew when I went there, I was going to be a third, fourth line grinder, not really great hands, but I worked hard, and I was kind of the guy that had to maximize everything at that point. So I was really clear. Nobody was ever going to pay me to play the game after college. So I actually went to class. I was sort of, I don't know if I was the nerd on the team, but I probably recognized a little more than others that I was going to have to figure out some other skills. And quite honestly, as I went through college, I sort of eventually, as I got towards the end, I saw a path into, the marketing world. My mom and stepfather were in the public relations business. So I got exposure to that a lot as I went through college, and that sort of led to the path into marketing and advertising.
Yeah. Were there
I have a quick question, Luke. I have to say it.
Sure.
Just given Chris, you said third, fourth line grinder, trying to make it happen out there. Is there someone that you relate to specifically on the Blues?
Yeah, Nathan Walker.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you not love? I mean, I'm not sure I ever had a season where I threw as many hits as he did, but yeah, I love fourth lines. Actually, it's a funny thing, and if you look back to 2019, Steiner dropping back and being part of that line. Sonny is another one. I love the way those guys play, and it's maximizing your talent. It's giving it all. It's working your butt off, killing penalties. Those are all the things that were sort of by college time, the sort of the trademark, if you will, of my game.
And did you try to bring that into your assistant coaching style at Babson for the year that you were there, or did you? I know it was during you were getting your MBA.
Yeah, I was getting my MBA. Actually, two years. No, actually, you're right. 1 year. I was thinking of the summertime. Yeah. So, Babson was an awesome experience. We actually had, at the time, there was a Division II, and we were a top team. We actually went to the Final Four, And yeah, that was, did I bring that to my coaching style? Yeah, I think a little bit. I started doing summer hockey camps when I was probably a junior in high school. And so I had developed a real passion for coaching. And quite honestly, while I was at Babson, I even, I thought about the path of staying in coaching because it did bring me a lot of joy. I think as I thought about the grind of being in rinks throughout the country, out recruiting as an assistant college hockey coach, somewhere it lost a little bit of its allure. And, I ended up not doing that. One of my favorite, maybe almost my favorite fun fact about my hockey coaching was while at Babson, I ran the first women's overnight hockey camp in the country. Oh. And I just fell into that somebody had developed this plan to run this camp. And the next thing I knew, I was the director there. And it was an awesome experience. But my favorite part of the experience was I had two women come to the camp from Alaska. And they were like, "Oh, wow, this is so great. We need some coaching like this." And I said, "Well, put something together, and next summer I'll come up and do it." And so when I finished my MBA, I went up to Anchorage, Alaska, and ran a women's hockey camp for a week. And
wow,
so those were sort of pioneering days in girls and women's hockey. And I'm actually quite proud that I got to do that.
Yeah, and you were kind of doing it before it was cool, I should say, because now all of it, you see the development of the PWSHL, something like that, and that's been a huge development in the two leagues there. And obviously St. Louis doesn't have one, but maybe you can be a part of the future there. Who knows? But yeah, that's a great fun fact, Chris. But also, I think transitioning out of that, I think you got a little bit of experience when it comes to starting these camps, but now we're going to get into the business side after you get out of coaching. So you go to Nike Bauer Hockey. Is that correct in the journey?
Well, actually, I started in New York City in advertising. I spent a decade in New York and working for a big agency. And, I got stints on Procter & Gamble and the Bisco brands, Wendy's, Burger King at different times. And, I really, it was its own education working with those types of companies, starting your career, learning about building brands. And, that part of my career, I would tell you, really shaped the work that I've done throughout the rest of it. And I learned a lot, smart people, really good clients, disciplined marketers, all of those things have really served me well.
I have a question on that, Chris. I guess a little bit after that timeline in advertising, but when you got the role at Nike, specifically want to hone in on the golf thing because that kind of fascinates me a little bit,
Sure.
just given what Nike Golf was going through with the Tiger Woods revelation. How fun was that? How did it even work? He was the biggest person on the planet in the sports world, it seemed, for such a long time. And you were at the forefront of it in those beginning years. So can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, well, first of all, going to Nike, when I actually, my first introduction to the working with Nike, our agency was pitching the Nike business really throughout Asia. So China, into Japan, Hong Kong. And it was, I got this call to say, "Hey, would you mind going over to Hong Kong and spending some time helping the people over there understand the Nike brand. And I hadn't been working with them. It was just, hey, you were an athlete. You can probably figure this out somehow. And so I got on a plane right after Christmas and went to Hong Kong, spent a week literally in a conference room in Hong Kong prepping to then go make our first presentation in Beijing. And so I'm at the agency, but quite honestly, our agency didn't end up winning the business, but I'd been introduced and gotten a little exposure to some of the Nike senior management. So you roll forward a little bit, a job 4 months later comes open to lead their North American advertising. And quite honestly, that was a dream opportunity. Here's a guy that's been, actually at the time, I think I was working on Tide and some laundry and Cascade dishwashing detergent for Procter & Gamble. And I had a chance to go manage Nike's advertising. So it was without question a dream job. And it was my entry into the sports world. So just quickly, 3 years working, leading advertising, and in that job, I was there. I'd been there, I think, about 6, maybe it was a year into it when Tiger Woods was in his 3rd U.S. Amateur, being played 20 minutes away from the Nike headquarters, and so we Nike, I'll use that a lot probably, had a plan and a target that we knew that this was, one of those, I don't know if we would have said once in a lifetime, but it was no secret where the Tiger Woods was going to have a massive impact on the game. I don't think anybody could have ever projected the impact he ended up having. Yeah. And so I got to literally, he wins the U.S. Amateur at Pumpkin Ridge just outside of Portland. And I'm there with a small group of people from Nike that are in the room where his family and others are drinking out of the amateur trophy. And then we went in and presented him his first ad in the conference room at Pumpkin Ridge. His dad, his mom, IMG rep, and so I got to see this evolution from a golfer that became much more than golf, and I think probably at that time became a global athletic icon faster than anybody. Because when Michael Jordan, when Nike started with him, you didn't have the internet. You didn't have the reach and the ability for people to see an athlete emerge like that. And, he was a rocket ship.
He was. Yeah.
That's a great story. I never would have thought that Tiger would be just like, so, because you were having pretty in-person regular contact with him probably at that time, like.
Yeah, I was. I actually got to work with him really for the first 8 years I worked at Nike, because it was from my first role as director of advertising, and then I moved over to help sort of restart Nike Golf. And so I dealt with him in different positions, but I got to see him grow up and evolve really quickly. Yeah. I got to have a couple times where I had to tell him things he didn't like, which, I don't know who I was, but that was my job at that point. Yeah. Among the interesting things was the family was very clear. They wanted him to be the next Jordan. Mm-hmm. And the first I'd say 2 years, year and a half, I was still in advertising. The first product line of footwear somewhere, I have one of those first shoes, and the apparel. It was an effort to be younger, cooler, hipper. We were going to sell some of it at Foot Locker, and the whole business strategy was completely off. And it really wasn't Tiger. It was Tiger. Though he was young and all that, he was, he loved golf history. He respected the game. And so it was a really interesting case study of a mismatch between developing product to try to change, quite honestly, somewhat both the athlete and the market. And it was a huge failure. And luckily, I can say I got to come in after that and try to fix it rather than own that part of it. But it was fascinating. Got to see him switch from Titleist, which he had played all his life and won a lot of tournaments, to the Nike golf ball. He switched and went on to win the Tiger Slam after that. So
is it the ball or?
Oh, it's definitely the ball. It wasn't. Well, it's an interesting question. It wasn't the ball, but watching him, because we probably spent 6 months working on that ball. And what you go and you do testing, and at the time, the Titleist's top ball, the Titleist Professional, had a wound core. And the big difference in the ball, the technology was, which is now in the Pro V1 as well, was a solid core. And Titleist believed so much that he wasn't going to change. All the best players, they weren't going to change to this other technology. And Tiger changed, and eventually the Pro V1 came, caught up, and passed Nike because the tradition of the brand and many other things. But I got to be at one of the last testing sessions before he switched, and it was really about control. It wasn't about distance. It was all about what he could do around the greens. And so he's hitting, these pitch shots into the green and getting them to check up. And he's like turning and looking at the people around him like, did you see that?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't the ball, it was his talent, but the ball made a difference.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. I guess let's move it a little bit towards hockey. Because although we could be talking about your probably time with Tiger for the whole episode.
Separate episode. Another one.
That could be
another time, guys.
My goodness. But in terms of, so you said your time with Tiger and with the golf brand that with Nike, but was there a hockey part of that as well with that? And
well, that was my last role at Nike. So Nike had bought Bauer year I came to the company. It was based up in Montreal, and the strategy early on was we were going to develop a Nike hockey brand and Bauer. So we were going to do these two brands, and we get some of their knowledge and all of those things. And Nike hockey was another complete flop. It was a bad idea. It was bad strategically. The product wasn't great. We did some fun commercials with Sergei Fedorov and a few others, Cam Neely actually. But the product wasn't right and the strategy wasn't right. So, I guess the company had owned Bauer for about 8 years, and they'd gone through a couple of people leading the company. They'd moved the headquarters from Montreal to New Hampshire. And so I saw this notice of that they were replacing the CEO. And I was running the U.S. golf. I was looking for my next opportunity. And I put my hand up and said, "Hey, guys, I wouldn't mind talking to you." And soon thereafter, I was moving from Portland, Oregon, back to Exeter, New Hampshire, where it was based. And that it was really the first time I was president and, had a full P&L and really got to run my own business. And there's nothing that tells you that you're ready to do that. Mm. And within the Nike world, it was a very small business. And it didn't get a lot of attention, and it was underperforming. So it was a turnaround. And, probably one of the most satisfying, roles I've ever had, because we were able to take the business and make a number of strategic decisions. We were in inline skates, and that market had basically fallen and basically disappeared. And there were some other issues around our manufacturing strategy and core things that needed to be changed. But I moved back east. It was funny because I would say I was 20, maybe 25 years removed from buying hockey sticks as a kid down in the New York, Connecticut area. And suddenly these same retailers, because it was all these, they were suddenly my customers.
Oh my God.
And I never dreamed that I would work in the business of hockey, and had Nike not owned Bauer, I don't know if we'd be sitting here today.
Mm. Yeah. That's a crazy story. And from there, and correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, so you go from Nike straight to Vancouver. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not a short flight either when you're back in New Hampshire. So I basically started in New York. I went to Portland, then I went to New Hampshire, and then to Vancouver. Yeah, I got a call one day that, again, the call was from a recruiter who said, "Hey, we're doing a search for the president and CEO of the Vancouver Canucks, and we got your name and heard that this might be a good fit." And I remember saying, "Well, that's interesting. I've never spent a minute thinking about working for a team or working in the NHL." And so I stopped and I thought, Vancouver, NHL, president, CEO, it was kind of, all these things are happening to me now. I guess, fortunately, you work and like there was no master plan here. It was all about opportunities that I was fortunate enough to have brought to me. And so I went up to Vancouver and, had a meeting, and, then we kept talking, and it was interesting because I'd been in the Bauer job for about, I think I'd been there probably a full 3 years, and we'd gotten the business to turn. And so I was at a meeting. This was kind of simultaneously with some Nike senior people. And after the meeting, they came up and said, "Well, hey, we've decided that we're happy with what you've done with the business, but we're going to sell it." And so I was in the early stages, but far enough along with the Canucks that I said, "Well, that's interesting. We should probably talk because I'm looking at this other opportunity." And And it was hard because they wanted me to be part of selling the Bauer business and to go to the private equity firm or whoever would buy it. And I was sort of, okay, so I have an opportunity to do that, but I'm leaving Nike, or I can go see if I have any ability to run an NHL team in a beautiful city that looks like a pretty cool place to live. And so that led to me going to Vancouver.
Wow. And then your time in Vancouver, I wasn't a huge hockey fan back in that time, and I was like 3 years old. But so was it? Yeah,
You don't have to age me, but keep going.
Or me.
Or you there. But so how did you transform the Canucks? Because I know that from my hockey history a little bit, they were on the upward trend at that point, and I think 2011 they made the Cup final, and they had the Sedin brothers, the twins. So you had a lot of, I think, marketing opportunities. So how did you kind of take advantage of that?
Yeah, I think when I got to so a couple things. Vancouver is, I would say, for most of the last 20 years, I consider it a boom market. So you're in a very strong economic growth trend. But honestly, the Canadian dollar was very strong for part of my time there. And all the players get paid in US dollars. So the Canadian dollar being strong has a big impact on the financials. Mm-hmm. I think Vancouver was, and the Canucks were, I would say, a strong entity. I mean, you're in a hockey crazy town. I mean, being in Canada and getting to run a Canadian team, I guess I'd probably say one of the big differences is you just, at the time, I felt like we had strong tailwinds helping drive it. And I think for me, it was, and this is probably a consistent theme, is always starting with culture and the people. What's the attitude, and is it an organization? Because these aren't, I mean, they're not huge organizations. Are people excited to show up? Are they challenged to innovate? Do they work in a way, in a collaborative way, or are they siloed, which is virtually always the case? Mm-hmm. And so, I think while I was in Vancouver, we certainly had some strong years, both on the business side and the team. The team was certainly strong. The day that I went to interview, they were actually having the draft in Vancouver. And I had my interview, and then I went, and I'm sitting at the hotel across the street, and up comes TSN announcing that the Florida Panthers have traded Roberto Luongo to the Vancouver Canucks. And the Canucks history, kind of a little bit like the Blues, was they just never had the right goalie. And so I guess essentially I arrived with Roberto Luongo. I didn't do anything to bring him there, but I arrived at the same time, and that was a big deal. And yeah, we had fun. We were in the playoffs 2 of my 3 years, and as you mentioned, 2 years after I left was the year they played the Bruins and lost in Game 7.